Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we are going to talk about Andrew Yang, Joe Biden, Martin Scorsese, and we're going to talk about these three men through the lens of the historic epic film, The Irishman, right? And what this film means about technology, what it means about age in the 2020s, what it means for the 2020 U.S. presidential primary race, what it means for Joe Biden, what it means for Andrew Yang. All right, so let's jump right into it, all right? So before we go a step further, there are spoilers for the movie, the Netflix film, Martin Scorsese's film, The Irishman, 2019, The Irishman. All right, let's jump into this. So first and foremost, I won't bury the lead here. I did not like this movie. I think that, all right, so here's why I didn't like this movie, all right? The age issue in this film is utterly absurd, and this movie should not have been made the way this movie was made. And there was incredible waste that was employed making this film. All right, so this movie cost over $150 million, right? Specifically, it was $159 million, so close to $160 million. In this movie, all right, you have three actors, okay, who are historic American actors. You have Robert, and by the way, of course, Martin Scorsese is a historic American director. So Martin Scorsese directed this. It had, actually, at minimum, I think yes, we'll keep going here. All right, so you have Martin Scorsese involved in the mix here. And what you have specifically is you have Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, and Joe Pesci. Robert De Niro plays Frank Sheeran, okay? Frank Sheeran is the Italian mobster. Actually, I guess he's Irish, right? He is a mafioso, right, who kills Jimmy Hoffa, who is presented in this film, and Jimmy Hoffa is played by Al Pacino. Jimmy Hoffa is presented to be also a mafioso and a teamster, okay? And then finally, Joe Pesci plays Russell Buffalino, who is a mafioso who then orders the killing of Jimmy Hoffa, right? What this movie claims from a historical perspective is pretty incredible. It is based on the book by on a book which is the story of Frank Sheeran's life, okay? And it's called, the book is called I Heard You Paint Houses, which is an allegory for assassination. So Frank Sheeran was an assassin, right? In addition to being a mafioso. And this is his life story, okay? This film Martin Scorsese's film purports that during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, the American labor unions were massively controlled directly by the Italian mafia. That's a huge, huge statement, right? That states a lot. The film intimates, by the way, the connection between the Italian mafia and and specifically American labor unions is not a dotted line. It is a thick black Sharpie line, not dotted. It is very straight and very connected, right? There is a dotted line. There is strong intimation in the film that the Italian mafia was directly involved in the murder of President Kennedy, right? Now that is a dotted line. It is simply intimated. There are like little clues and hints given, right? It is not directly stated, okay? And it is also, the movie also answers an age-long question, and this was a very real question. I remember when I was a kid, in the 70s and 80s, people talking about where Jimmy Hoffa was. And I remember specifically, I lived in Racine, Wisconsin, and I remember when I lived in Racine, Wisconsin, there was a lot of discussion that Jimmy Hoffa was buried in the cement in the stadium where the Chicago Bears played. I remember that specifically when I was a kid, hearing those rumors, right? Excuse me. And it really was quite interesting because there was really no question in the public's mind that Jimmy Hoffa had been killed by the mob, by the mafia, right? So this movie states huge things about American history, right? Now, of course, it is a fiction film, right? But it is claiming to be based on historical events, right? All right. Now, I did not think this was a good movie, and I'll tell you why. One specific reason: age. Age is the problem with this film, and so let's talk this through, okay? The aging in this film is utterly ridiculous, and I'm not talking about the computer de-aging, right? I'm just talking about the very concept of this film is ludicrous. So this is what The Irishman actually is. It is quite literally, right, Pacino, De Niro, and Pesci, who are in their late 70s, 76 to 79 years old. Can you imagine that? Oh, and guess what? It's pretty much exactly the age of Joe Biden, right? So, exactly the age of Joe Biden. Oh, by the way, our current 2020 U.S. primary presidential race has a septuagenarian trinity. Guess what The Irishman has? A septuagenarian trinity, right? They're the same, right? But really, The Irishman is an absolute shadow event of the making of the film. The Irishman is an absolute lockstep shadow event of Joe Biden's campaign. All right, but let's explain the issue with The Irishman. It is what The Irishman tries to do as a film is utterly absurd, and Martin Scorsese, someone should have told him this is a bad idea. All right, so let me break it down for you. Okay, Pesci, De Niro, Pacino, they're all in their late 70s. This movie is being released essentially in the 2020s. I'm going to say 2020 going forward. It came out in 2019, but it came out very, very late in 2019, literally in December. Close enough. We're going to call it 2020, okay? So this is 70-year-old, literally 70-year-old actors, late 70s, playing, this is literally 70-year-old actors in the 2020s, playing 80-year-old actors in the early 2000s with flashbacks to their same characters as 30 years old in the 1950s, 40 years old in the 1960s, and 50 years old in the 1970s. Right? Did that sound confusing to you? Yes, it is confusing. It is massively confusing. And when you watch it, it is not a failure of technology to do what technology can do. It is an utter failure of direction. This was all Martin Scorsese's fault. I did not like this movie. I thought this movie was an absolute travesty and was a train wreck and was a massive waste of resources, okay? And it all has to do with age, right? It is completely unfollowable, right? When you are looking at the people on the screen, you are like, what is happening? How old is this person on the screen? What is the time that is happening right now, right? What decade are we in? How old is the person on the screen actually supposed to be right now, right? And it's incomprehensible. You can't tell at all how old anybody is supposed to be, and it's almost never clear what decade you're in. And get this, every single part of this is Martin Scorsese's fault, right? He bobbled this at a level that is shockingly bad, right? So one of the things is, there's a way you could have attempted to tell this movie in some type of order, right? But literally, rather than just telling the movie straight and going 1950, 1960, 1970, let's jump to the 2000s. Sequentially, right? You already have massive confusion about real ages, presented ages, and time progression in the film. And Martin Scorsese says, even with all the outrageous confusion that already exists, I'm going to throw in flashbacks. And I swear, I think I remember there were flashbacks in the flashbacks. It's incredible. Like, the movie makes no sense from the perspective of age, right? So when you're done watching this hot mess, right, you're just like, why was this done? What, you know? But when you're also done, it is incredibly clear, right? That what you're really watching and what you're really seeing, right, is Joe Biden's campaign, right? Because Martin Scorsese's The Irishman and Joe Biden's campaign are exactly the same in the following way. They are large corporations giving over $100 million to a very, very old person to use technology in a way that makes no sense to accomplish something that is only slightly different than has already been accomplished. So it is large corporations giving a very old white person over $100 million to use technology in a way that technology should not be used to accomplish virtually nothing. That's exactly what Joe Biden's campaign is, and that's exactly what The Irishman is, right? Now, the reality is, you know, in both cases, there was a better path, right? For this Scorsese film, right? I get it, right? Scorsese wants to get together with Pesci and Al Pacino and De Niro and make sure that every single one of them is paid $10 million plus. Maybe $20 million plus. I totally understand that. I get it, right? Like, I understand why you would want that, right? It could have been done in the film, right? The way I would have done this, the way I would have done The Irishman, and there would have been massive benefit to this, right, is I would have hired De Niro, hired Pacino, hired Pesci, right? Had Pesci and De Niro do the roles of 80-year-old Sheeran and 80-year-old Buffalino in prison. You got to get Pacino in there. I get it. He's part of the legacy with De Niro. He's part of the legacy with Pesci. He's part of the legacy with Scorsese, right? You got to get Pacino in there, right? So at this point in the film, with 80-year-old Sheeran and 80-year-old Buffalino, right? Hoffa's dead. Pacino plays Hoffman, right? Hoffa's dead. So what I would have had is just one single scene where Pacino appears as a ghost, as Jimmy Hoffa's ghost, and has a single conversation with Sheeran, right? That's exactly how I would have done it, right? Give him a little shimmery blue light, you know, ghost him up, right? And then the 30, 40, and 50-year-old Hoffa, Buffalino, and Sheeran. For Hoffa, Paul Rudd, okay? For Buffalino, Taron Egerton. For Sheeran, Chris Pratt, okay? Now, once you cast those young people who are all in massive series that have millions and millions of fans, you have even a hope that somebody under the age of 40 or 50 years old would watch this film, which right now I'm not sure anyone under the age of 40 watched this film. Probably even, well, I'm 49 and I watched it, so I guess people under 50 watched it. But you would have had a chance that some young people would have watched this film, right? And then there's a huge benefit, right? Taron Egerton, Paul Rudd, Chris Pratt, one of them is probably going to end up being a director, just like Clint Eastwood, right? And it would have rubbed off, and they would have had, and 5-10 years from now, you could have had a Paul Rudd movie, a Taron Egerton directed, a Paul Rudd directed movie, or a Taron Egerton directed movie, or a Chris Pratt directed movie with Scorsese flourishes, with Scorsese base, right? With his knowledge coming through a young director, right? There would have been incredible value to that. But no, right? Scorsese needs to work closely as late 70s De Niro, right? You put late 70s De Niro in a scene, and this isn't a joke, this actually happened in the movie, in a scene where late 70s De Niro gives a mafia beatdown to a guy, to another character, and his character, Sheeran, is supposed to be 30 years old in the 1950s, right? He's supposed to be 30 years old in the 1950s, beating up another 30-year-old man, right? And I'm not kidding. In order to show Robert De Niro kicking and punching a person. They needed more CGI than it took to put Thanos on the screen in Avengers Endgame. It was utterly absurd, right? And it wasn't poorly done, right? Like, it didn't look fake, right? I could tell, well, actually, I don't even need to tell, right? You see Robert De Niro go in town on this, and you're like, I know for a fact no 77, no late 70s person can move like that. It doesn't work that way. Science is a thing, right? Like, it is so incredibly galling to me that the Democrats are calling for every red state person in the world to get hip and get scienced up and make sure they understand that climate change is real, but they also want those same people to forget the science that running a U.S. presidential election, running in a U.S. presidential race causes heart attacks, right? Like, literally, like we're seeing it in real time. The experiment results are in, right? Like, it's absurd. This is absurd, right? Like, and real science says that 70-year-olds don't throw beatdowns on people. It just doesn't happen, right? Late 70s people, right? Bones get broken if they kick people. It's like, it's utterly absurd. And The Irishman was utterly absurd, right? And The Irishman is incredibly sad because it is this situation where we have, large corporations giving over $100 million to a very, very old person to use technology incredibly poorly to accomplish something that has virtually no value, right? And that's exactly what Joe Biden's campaign is, right? And it's exactly what The Irishman is, right? It should never occurred. Now, what should Andrew Yang's response to the travesty of The Irishman be, and to the travesty of Joe Biden's campaign? Well, the same thing, right? Andrew Yang has to speak to late 70-year-olds. He's got to continue to speak to late 70-year-olds, right? He should be doing this through dog whistling, mentioning Ovaltine as much as he can, and all, Shirley Temple and a million other weird old things that will resonate with these people, right? And I'm not even sure what those are, but I don't need to know, and nor does Andrew Yang. He's got a team of 70 people to tell him what he should be talking about, right? And then also, he really needs to be crafting specifically very specific policies that will be attractive to late 70-year-olds. It can only be about 5 or 10% of his platform. He can't sell his platform to the aged, but he's got to address it in some way. All right? All of that is my opinion. I'd love to hear your opinion on the topic. Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.